Hi, third graders. Today we're going to start a new standard. We're going to be moving to nonfiction text, and we're going to be reading about time and sequence. And this is going to have to do with a lot of historical text, meaning texts that are about things that happened a long time ago in history. So let's get started. So I know lots of people like good stories, and I'm sure you're one of those too. Well, a good story has events, and in those events, the author puts those stories in order, the events of the story in order. They use words such as first, next, then. You can also use words like first, second, third, like if you're giving directions on how to do something, which would be called a technical text. And texts that we're going to be reading today have events in order by their dates. So like the 1800s or the 1900s. Those are the way that the authors will organize text with the events in order, because when you understand the order of events, knowing how to order those events, the important events, makes it easier to understand what you are reading and to figure out how those events are related. So today we are going to read many historical stories where we are going to look for events that happen in sequential order, which means in which happen first, second, third, and we're also going to use the words called time order. So that brings us to our learning target. Our learning target is, today we will use time and sequence words to help us understand how events in history are connected. So what are sequence words or time order words? Well, sequence means that things happen in order. There's a special order that events happen or steps in a technical process. So I want you to think, what is a sequence word that you can think of? I just gave you a few seconds earlier. So think, what is a sequence word you can think of? Okay, well, some of those words you might have come up with might be on this list. Some examples like I gave you earlier: first, second, third, also, then, next, after, furthermore, in addition, lastly, to conclude, at the end. Those show that things are happening in order. So these are some examples of sequence words. Another group of words that authors use in text to show that events are happening in a certain order are time order words. So this chart shows you that there are words that show that something happened before an event, and words that showed that of events that happen first, events that happen next. Sometimes is also a time order word, and last. So these are all words that you can use in your writing when you are writing events in order. And you should also be looking for these words when you read so that you can understand what event happened first and then happened after that and what happened last. So our lesson for today is going to take place on page 38 and 39 of your Ready Common Core reading book. Or if you are a hybrid student, you should have a copy of this that Ms. Jaramillo and I sent home with you before school was out. So let's look at the learning target on page 38. Up here, it says, using time and sequence words will help you understand how events in history are connected. Remember, we're really learning about how to understand what we're reading. And when we're reading nonfiction text, that means things that are true, it's really important to look at the events that happened in the order that they happened and how they're connected. So follow along with me as I read on page 38 on the read section. Do you like a good story? Then you probably enjoy history. History is the story of events that happened in the past. Historical events are usually told in a sequence, which is the order which they happened. The sequence can help you understand the relationships or connections between those events. When you read, look for signal words that give clues about time order and sequence. First, next, and finally are signal words. So are phrases such as later that year and in 1864. Read the cartoon below. What is happening? How are the events related? Okay, so let's look at this cartoon. So in the first picture, we see a boat with Vikings on it, and they're sailing. So the caption underneath says, first the Vikings sailed to North America. Notice that there is a signal word here, first. It shows that that's what they did first. When we look at this second picture here, we see that the Vikings have set up some houses, they've got a fence, they've got a road, and we look at the text, and right here there's another signal word. It says next. So we know that first they sailed, and then next they started a settlement. That means that they built houses and small places for their families and other people to live. Now we look at this third picture here, and we see what they're back on a boat, and we look, and the signal word after a few difficult years. The Vikings gave up and returned home. So in that signal or time order phrase, we see the word difficult. So when I think about that, I'm thinking after a few difficult years. Well, it looks like they built settlements, but those settlements may have been really difficult for them to maintain. Maybe they didn't have enough food. Maybe cold weather was hard. Maybe they had a lot of people dying. Maybe they didn't have water. So there could have been a whole bunch of reasons why they left. So they went back to where they came from. So this shows us a story of 3 events that happened in order. We're going to take these events and put them into the chart on page 39. So we're going to do this together. So if you don't have a pencil already, please grab one, and we're going to write in this chart. Okay, up on page 39, it says, think. Read the cartoon again. Notice the signal words that are used. Now fill in the chart below by writing the events in the order which they happened. So this is just practice for us to remember what happened first, next, and at the end. And on the chart, you can see that the signal words were already written out for us. So what we're going to do is fill in the chart with the events that happened. So let's look back at the first picture. Right over here, we see that the Vikings sailed to North America. So we're going to write that in our chart. The Vikings sailed to North America. So pause the video and write that in your chart. Okay, the next picture shows that they started a settlement. So we're going to write that in the second part of the chart. They started a settlement. And the reason I use the word they is because in the first one I already wrote the word Vikings, so I know who we're talking about. If you didn't write the word Vikings in the first one, we definitely need to put Vikings in the second part of the chart instead of the word they. So pause the video and write that down. Okay, what happened after a few years? The Vikings gave up and returned home. So we're going to write that in the chart. The Vikings gave up and returned home. So when you look back at this chart, you tell a story in order. First, the Vikings sailed to North America. Next, they started a settlement. And after a few years, the Vikings gave up and returned home. Using those signal words help us understand the events and understand the story. Down here in the talk part, it says, think about the second and third things that happened in the cartoon. So what is the relationship between these 2 events? Well, the second event is here and the third event is here. And I mentioned this earlier. They started a settlement, and maybe they had a very hard time getting it up and going, and they decided it wasn't worth the effort, so they went and they gave up and went home. So those are related because we need to know why the Vikings ended up going home. Well, it's because they had a difficult time getting that settlement started. And then the next part of the talk section says, was the third event what you expected? Did you expect that the Vikings would give up and go home after they had spent time starting a settlement? Maybe or maybe not. So look at this information that we learned just from 3 pictures and 3 small sentences. We learned a lot about the Vikings. That's because this is a story that we really looked into using the events and how they happened in order. Okay, let's look at the academic talk words. We have sequence, relationships, and historical. Those are 3 words that are going to show up a lot in our this week in our lessons. Okay, turn to pages 40 and 41 in your Ready Common Core reading book or the copies of the papers that you have. We are going to read a story, a historical story. That means this is something that happened in the past called Adventures of the Growing Nation. And what this is this is how the United States started its expansion into the western part of the United States. There were 2 explorers called Lewis and Clark. That was their last names. And they were given a special assignment by the President of the United States at that time, who was Thomas Jefferson, to explore the western part of the United States, because even though the United States owned that land, they didn't really know what was out there. So the President Jefferson gave Lewis and Clark a special assignment to go and map out this land that nobody had explored before. They wanted to know if there were mountains or rivers or lakes or flatland, what was out there, so that they could get people to start moving that direction. So we're going to read the story first to find out what it's about. Then we're going to look at the chart on page 41 for those signal words, and we're going to read the story again and look for those signal words in the text. And we're going to find out what events happened during that period of time. And we're going to write those in the chart, and then you are going to fill this out in Schoology. So we're going to do it together, but you're going to have to turn it into me through Schoology. All right, so follow along with me on page 40. We're going to read it together one time, then you're going to read it again while you look for those signal words and the events that happened at that period of time. Okay, follow along with me at the first paragraph. The title is Adventures of the Growing Nation. Imagine that in one day our country doubled in size. That's what happened to the United States in 1803. President Thomas Jefferson asked France is another country across the ocean, to sell the United States a vast area of land. Overnight, America added more than 828,000 square miles of land west of the Mississippi River. This is known as the Louisiana Purchase. So the part of the land that is west of the Mississippi River, let me get my highlighter, which is this area over here, is called the Louisiana Purchase. And the United States had to buy that from France. Even though France is across the ocean, they owned that part of the land. But the United States bought that so that we could expand our country. Okay, paragraph 2. Jefferson wanted to know the fastest way across the new land. At the time, there were no maps of the whole country. Jefferson asked Meriwether Lewis to explore the area. Lewis was an army captain whom Jefferson trusted. Lewis chose another soldier, William Clark, to help him lead the party. To get ready, they first had a large boat built. The boat took the men down the Ohio River. Then they built a base camp near St. Louis, Missouri. They spent the winter of 1803 there. Finally, on May 14, 1804, Lewis and Clark began their famous trip into the new territory. 50 men went with them. They traveled for over 18 months, so that's about a year and a half. Finally, the group made it to the Pacific Ocean. On November 7, 1805, Clark wrote, "Ocean in view, oh joy!" The group spent a long cold winter near the ocean. Then they began the trip back home in March 1806. Lewis and Clark arrived in St. Louis in September 1806. St. Louis is where they started out, so they now are back. And they were greeted with a big party. that means a lot of people were celebrating their homecoming, that they were back from their exploration. A century later, so 100 years later, in 1904, the World's Fair was held in St. Louis. People honored Lewis and Clark's journey at the fair. Okay, so that is the first read of this story. Now you're going to do the second read. What I want you to do is I want you to look for these signal words that we see over here on page 41. We see the word first, we see the winter 1803, May 1804, November 1805, and September 1806. I want you to underline where you see those dates in the text and then think about what happened during those dates. So pause the video while you fill out the chart and then we'll check it together. Okay, now that you have your chart filled out, let's see how you did. So the first event that happened, let's see if I can erase that. There we go. The first event that happened in our chart was already given to us, and it says President Jefferson asks Meriwether Lewis to explore the new land. And we know that was up here in the first paragraph here. It says, the second paragraph. Jefferson asked Meriwether Lewis to explore the area. Okay, so the next part we were supposed to find was winter 1803 and underline what happened in that part of the text. So this is what you should have had underlined. And it doesn't say anything really after that, so we need to look before that. And it says they built a base camp near St. Louis. Well, we need to say who they is. So in the chart, you make sure you put the names. Lewis and Clark built a base camp near St. Louis. Okay, the next date is May 1804, and we see that over here. And we need to know what event that was. And it says Lewis and Clark began their famous trip into the new territory. So that needs to be in the chart. Lewis and Clark began their famous trip. Okay, the next date is November 1805. We see that right here in paragraph 4. And we notice that is where they made it to the ocean. So the sentence before the date says, finally, the group made it to the Pacific Ocean. So we're going to put that in the chart. The group made it to the Pacific Ocean. And then the last date on the chart was September 1806, and that's down here in paragraph 5 and right here. And the event that happened right before the date says Lewis and Clark arrived in St. Louis. And we knew that that's where they started. So in the chart, we need to say Lewis and Clark returned home and were greeted with a big party. All right, if you need to pause the video and finish filling in your chart or correct something, go ahead and do that now. The next part of your assignment that you're going to be doing in Schoology is you're going to reread paragraphs 2, 3, and 4 and just talk to yourself about how the things that happen in those paragraphs, how are those events related? Think about the order of events, since that's what we're practicing. And then your last part is going to be a short response. You're going to concentrate on the paragraphs 3, 4, and 5, and you're going to look and see what the major event that happened in paragraph 3 is, what happened in 4, and what happened in 5. And you can use your chart to help you out because you're going to write these down in order that they happened in Schoology. All right, so let's review what your assignment is. You're going to read again The Adventures of a Growing Nation on page 40. You'll look at the dates on the chart that we just filled in on page 41. You should have already filled in the chart with the matching events from the story, but if you didn't, please go back and do that. And then you're going to look at the events that happened in paragraphs 3, 4, and 5, and you're going to fill that information in the assignment in Schoology. All the directions are in the assignment, but you're going to need this text to help you answer the questions. All right, let's wrap it up. Today we used time and sequence words to help us understand how events in history are connected. All right, as soon as you're finished with your chart, go back to Schoology, click on the assignment, and put your information from the chart into the assignment. Good job, boys and girls. We'll see you next time.